Well, the latest inflation numbers came out this morning, so are we out of the woods? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon and welcome to the Prudent Money Radio Show. I'm your host, Bob Brooks. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, we're not taking calls today, and if you have a question for me, please go to the prudentmoney.com website, go to the Ask Bob section, and I will get that taken care of for you. That's all at the website, prudentmoney.com. Well, the inflation numbers came out this morning. It's that time of the month. Obviously, they've released the inflation numbers once a month, and it's the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, rose 8.5% in July from a year ago. Now, expectations, which I really don't think even counts anymore because economists miss these expectations like they did with the unemployment numbers, which we talked about the other day. They said it should be 8.7%, so 0.2% decrease in what they thought it was supposed to say, and you would think that Wall Street was going to throw the biggest party ever. What this was the signal that Wall Street was looking for is that inflation is slowing down. But if you really dig into these numbers, I don't know that they are slowing down that much. We did get a reprieve from energy costs. Those went down, and of course that affected the numbers. I was looking at a chart of the Consumer Price Index. What's interesting to me is that in May of 2020, that number was at zero. And 2 years later, of course, this is what their estimation is. It's at 8.5%. Now, if you take a look at, and we talk about this, what is the real inflation rate? The real inflation rate, I believe, is between 20 and 25%. All you have to do is go and look at your grocery bill. You go look at your gasoline prices. And I think still, even with the drop in energy prices, that is still well over 20% than it was last year. But if you take out food and energy prices, and you're probably thinking, why would they take out food and energy prices? Because they're wanting to look at all the other items that aren't so important, that aren't volatile, and those rose just a little bit underneath estimates. So that to me was some good news. I guess it's good news that we didn't have high energy prices for the month, and the CPI didn't go through the roof. But lower than expected numbers, but as, believe it or not, a CNBC article says, inflation pressures remained strong, and they take the jump in food prices. The jump in the food index put the 12-month increase to 10.9%. the fastest pace since May 1979. Get these stats. Butter is up 26.4% over the past year. Eggs have surged 38%, and coffee is up more than 20%. Despite the monthly drop in the energy index, which was the thing that brought the index number down, electricity prices rose 1.6% and were up 15.2% from a year ago, which you can definitely see that in your bills. The energy index rose 32.9% from a year ago. Says one chief economist, this is the most encouraging report we've had in quite some time. You gotta love pop culture. Not to be the internal pessimist or anything, but I'm just saying, let's keep this into perspective, because what we want to see come down, I mean, it's great the energy prices have come down. They're still in the grand scheme of things, they're high. Food prices, though, is what we're looking to come down. That would be to me, good news. But I guess the problem is with such a jump in prices, and you get the real inflation rate, how long is it going to take? I mean, we may be leveling off, and which would be a step one in getting these inflation rates down some. But at what point do we start seeing meaningful falls in prices to get back to normal? I would suggest to you that we've had or are experiencing equal to or bigger jump than we did in the 70s, even though the consumer price index was higher during the 70s than it is today. I think it got up to like 19%. But we're coming off of a baseline of 0. They were coming off of a baseline of 7 or 8%. So it'll be interesting to see at what point first of all, do costs, let's just pick on food for a second, the food index starts to fall, and then where's the equilibrium? Where does it kind of bottom out? I still think it's going to be bottoming out higher than where it started, and only because we had gotten so incredibly low in our interest rates and inflation rates to a deflationary environment that it's going to be hard. It's going to be real difficult to get back down to those levels. Hey, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. If you do have a question for me, please go to the website at www.prudentmoney.com, and I will get it taken care of for you. Yesterday, I had Chuck Bentley on the program. He's the CEO of Crown Financial Ministries. Phenomenal organization, and they for decades have been doing a great job teaching stewardship in the church and through their Crown Small Group class. If you ever get an opportunity to go sit in and do one of those classes, I believe it's like 8 weeks or something like that. You and your spouse, I know that you're probably going, have not met my spouse, and my spouse and I don't talk very well about money, which we'll talk about that here in a second as well. But it's a great opportunity for you and your spouse in a safe environment to get on the same page. What I like about what Crown does, they do about 20% practical application that really results in homework between you and your spouse to go back and do some number crunching and get on the same page, talk a little bit about values and goals and that kind of thing. Get a game plan. And 80% or so is about what the Bible says about money, which is just invaluable. And you start to look at things through a totally different filter. I taught this class in my church for, I think about, 6 or 7 sessions. And it had a profound effect on me. I was counseling one time with a widow, just had lost her husband, and probably the worst possible way that you can lose a spouse. And she's always had a real tough time with money and the way she works with money and her feelings about money. And this, of course, the death of her husband really sent her spiraling out of control almost. We had talked quite a few times, and I invited her to come to the Crown class. And I'll never forget this. She showed up, and it was at the very beginning, so we hadn't started yet, and someone told me that someone was outside the door to see me. So I walk outside, and there she is, just trembling. And she goes, "I can't do it. I can't face financial situations right now. I can't face money. I'm just not in a good spot." And I looked at her and I said, I think a lot of people who in that room feel the same way. They just haven't been through what you've been through. I said, just come on in. You can try it out. And if it's not for you, then don't come back. And I think about this testimony. And I still just get chill bumps when I think about how God used that class to transform her into someone who wasn't confident about money, to somebody who was over the top. In fact, she was leading sessions by the time it was all over with. Always happy, always laughing, getting into the homework. I mean, God transformed her through the use of Crown. I didn't mean to get in such a long commercial for Crown Financial Ministries. It's easy to do if you want to champion a Crown class. And you may say, you know what? I don't know anything about Crown. I don't know that much about money. I shouldn't be teaching. You're not going to be teaching. You're facilitating discussions, and it's very easy to do. So you can start one at your church, but their website is crown.org, and it's a great place. Great place to go visit. See a lot of information about Chuck and some of his financial wisdom. I was telling somebody just yesterday after the program, I have friends who like to text me during the program and say, I'm listening to you. And so I was talking about there's nobody that can teach stewardship like Chuck Bentley. And of course, it's all a reflection of Crown in his life too, being CEO of the company. But just crown.org is where you would go, and you can get more information there. And Chuck's latest book, The Economic Evidence for God. I had a question that came in based on yesterday's show. And because the question that Chuck and I started out with is, how do you face a gloom and doom situation? I mean, how bad do you think the economy is going to get? And the question is, how bad do you think that inflation is going to get? Chuck's answer to that was he didn't feel like that it was going to get as bad as everybody has painted that picture, that it's going to get really bad. It's going to be tough, and we're going to go through some tough times. I believe that without question that we are in a recession. Of course, there's a lot of people who would disagree with that. But I think that the biggest fear is, are we going the way of hyperinflation? And that is an important question. And it's also one that would be the worst case scenario. And hyperinflation is when inflation gets completely out of control. And a loaf of bread, they always use a loaf of bread as an example. One day it's $2, the next day it's 20. And it's a really bad situation. I personally don't think that we're going towards that type of situation. I do think that this recession is going to be noted in history by the length of time that it takes to get some of this toxicity out of the system, out of the economic system, get some healthy things going again, and start to rebuild. And it's just going to be a long process. And that's, how you handle a long process. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have horrible unemployment numbers. Obviously, with any recession, you have unemployment numbers. But it just, how long it takes is a function of how I believe we face stewardship and the stewardship decisions that we make. And one decision that I think is the most important one to make is, how committed are we to stewardship on a day-to-day basis? And that's such a big question. It's such a big process. But it's the day-to-day commitment to your personal relationship with Christ and stewardship and being the best steward that you can be. I believe if we start to implement that and go through that process, that we can handle anything that comes our way. But it's all an opinion. As I was saying yesterday, only time will tell exactly how this all ends up. And but I think the most important thing that we can do is focus on what's real, and the only thing that's real is the relationship with Christ and our commitment to stewardship. Hey, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Yesterday, there's some things I thought about after the program that I wanted to kind of touch on, because Chuck and I talked about 4 or 5 different questions that came into their website. Talking about money with your spouse, no doubt can be a tough one. And the question, if I go off the top of my head, was that the husband was saying to his wife, or about his wife, that she's the most organized of the two. She handles all the financial bills and everything financially related, and she gets upset when they go over budget, just even a little bit. And his I didn't say this was in the question. The question ended with, how do I get her to chill out? Ladies, I know that if you're anything like my wife, if I tell my wife she just needs to chill out, I don't get a good response. So I don't think that we want to suggest that our spouse needs to chill out, especially when we have the luxury, the spouse that wants the other spouse to chill out, that spouse has the luxury of not dealing with the finances. Okay? I mean, that is a luxury, because, and I see this on a counseling basis a lot, the spouse that has to deal with the finances and takes all that on themselves, and it can be the husband, it can be the wife, it's whoever's probably better suited for it, is stressed. They see the numbers, they see the surprises, they deal with any of the debt that's been accumulated or continues to accumulate, or whatever the situation is, and it's tough. So I think that one of the most important things we could do today as stewards of what God has given us is get on the same page with our spouse. And 3 or 4 different tips that I wanted to give out if this is the route that you and I would encourage you to take if you're not on the same page. The first one is, if you're going to sit down at a table and talk about something that could be as volatile as money is, and that volatile as a subject as money, you might want to invite God to join you. Now, how many times, and I'm raising my hand, you can't see me obviously, I'm as guilty as anybody else, do we sit down with our spouse and start an important conversation without praying for wisdom, for grace, and for a peaceful resolution or understanding of how things are working? So, absolutely, just like you open up church with a word of prayer, you open up this discussion with a word of prayer. I think that that's critical, number one. It's a little bit tougher to argue when you have God sitting at the table. Think of it that way. The second tip is, you can't argue if you are intently listening. Make it a goal, because obviously one spouse knows everything about the finances, the other spouse doesn't. So now the other spouse is getting informed. You may like or you may not like what you hear. You may or you may not disagree. You may or may not agree with how your spouse has handled something. But the whole point is to listen intently. Take notes. Old Stephen Covey principle that I love and always think about. Seek first to understand, then be understood. The person who wants to argue, the person who wants to fight wants to be understood, could care less what the other spouse thinks. They want to be understood, and that's what they fight for. Put it all to the side. In fact, one of the best pieces of advice that I think I've ever heard, I think it was Brian Tracy who gave this advice, is to leave your ego at the door. Because fighting and arguing is all about, I want to be right, I want to make you wrong. And the ego is at work. So just leave that ego at the door. But you can't argue if you're listening intently. If you're listening intently, you're not thinking about, well, what you're going to say, what you're going to come back, and when you're going to say it. You're just listening. The third tip is to show grace. Well, unless you are perfect. So easy to get on to a spouse about something they did financially that you didn't agree with. How many boneheaded, I like that word, mistakes have you made as a spouse with money? None of us are perfect. Always show grace. I love the word grace. And that's part of the fruits of the Spirit, to show grace. After you've gotten through all this initial discussion, the initial information, I think it's important to say, what is important to us, where we are today, not where we wish we were, but where we are. What is important as far as developing a set of values and a set of priorities? This is priorities of your family, priorities of both of you. It's not a priority that the husband wants to get a new car and the wife doesn't want to get a new car, but this is going to be a priority, and it's only a priority if you both agree on the same priority. And we give up our sense of self in some of these situations to come to the middle and together to agree on one set of values and one set of priorities. And many times where I've talked to a husband and wife that are in disagreement, oftentimes it's about values and priorities and being on the same page and being stubborn about what you want. You got to remember there's two people at that table that have to agree upon a harmonious resolution to what they both want. And listen, I'd be the last person to sit here and say, that's a piece of cake to do this. It's so very easy. It's not easy. Also, I think with God in present, God directing, God as a focal point, it does get easier to get to that place and to get to a spot to where you can develop those. Because once you have a set of values, this is what's important to us. Every decision runs through those set of values and takes a priority. And I wish I had more time to speak to that. But that's why having your priorities and always knowing exactly what's important to both of you is so extremely, extremely valuable in a relationship and dealing with money. Hey, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. If you got a question for me, please go to the website, www.prudentmoney.com. We are all out of time. Until we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.